Bueno, hello,
Hola.
hola Erik, te damos la bienvenida
Ahí está acoplando, ¿no?
desde Buenos Aires.
Bueno, acá.
Hello.
Hello. Ay. Vamos a empezar. La primera pregunta es una pregunta más general relacionada justamente con el libro en cuestión, que es Tecgnosis. Nos gustaría que nos contaras cuál fue el origen del libro y por qué un libro que fue escrito hace 25 años sigue teniendo tanta vigencia ahora.
Yes, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. It's fun to talk about something that I did a very long time ago. And it's very satisfying that it is relevant, although in some ways it's a little disturbing because it's not always the most optimistic view. But the origins of the project, that's a very good question. I became interested in cyberculture and postmodern philosophy at the same time that I got interested in ancient Gnosticism and the works of science fiction works of Philip K. Dick. And so this was all a very interesting meshwork that set me going towards Tecgnosis. So I started to, as a journalist, cover technology after I did my undergraduate studies in the popular press. And this was in the very early 1990s when virtual reality and cyberspace were new ideas. And I noticed two things. One is that the technologies that people were interested in, the new technologies that were coming, the sense that something new was really happening with digital computers and the internet, stirred up a lot of what you could call mythological and magical and even religious ideas that weren't always recognized as such. So that was one thing. And the other thing I noticed, the second thing, was that there was a relationship between digital culture in the 1990s, a long time ago when it was a much smaller community. Now we are all in digital culture. But there was a relationship between that and the history of the counterculture, particularly in California, which meant that the Grateful Dead, psychedelics, Buddhism, alternative religion, all of these things in some ways were influencing technoculture. And so with these inspirations, I started to look historically and in terms of the contemporary at those places where technology, and particularly media technology, the technology of communications, overlapped this mythological or magical or religious imagination in the present and in the past. And I just started to gather this information where these two seemingly different practices, ideologies, actually married one another or overlapped. So what I discovered is that you can look at the history of religion and the history of, let's call it magic, as a kind of media history, and a media history that informs our contemporary imagination of the possibilities and the threats, the good side and the dark side, of the new technologies we're building and interacting with today. And at the time, in the late 1990s, there was a tremendous exuberance about new technologies, particularly in California. It was the first internet bubble. But for me, I wanted to look at these marginal sort of looking underneath the rug at the digital unconscious and pull out these stories and these images that were kind of driving things, but not on the surface. So I was looking kind of in the depths. And so in the 1990s, what I was covering was still pretty marginal. I was writing about UFOs, psychedelics, magic, Dungeons and Dragons, fantasy novels. It's, science fiction, pulp science fiction, Philip K. Dick. And so those things were still a bit, again, marginal. But today, they're as much a part of our mainstream as anything. And so the value of what I did 25 years ago, looking at the margins, it's now kind of in the center. And we are all thinking about conspiracy theory, other worlds, DMT. I mean, it's, for me, kind of crazy, but it's what's happened. And that's why Tecgnosis is even more relevant in many ways, even though it's a 25-year-old book about technology.
Me preguntaba cuál fue la recepción que tuviste en ese momento, cómo fue recibida la obra, y vos después contás en el epílogo, que es posterior, ¿no? Que es, no sé exactamente el año en que fue escrito, pero fue creo que 10 años después, cómo cambió la situación en Estados Unidos con el 11 de septiembre, y otros fenómenos como la novela de Dan Brown, que hicieron poner de pronto el tema de los miedos americanos y esta atracción por la temática medieval y ciertos temas esotéricos, si te dieron otro lugar en el ámbito de la industria cultural.
The book was not particularly well received when it came out. It was not widely reviewed. It was barely reviewed. But it got into the hands of many subcultures. So digital artists, magicians and people working with esotericism, Buddhists, psychedelic people. So a lot of, and hackers, people who are interested in the fringes of technology. And so it became kind of a cult book, like a secret book that, oh, do you know of this book? Which for me is very satisfying. I've never been interested in being a very big, commanding pundit. I like more marginal cultures and influences. So that was one answer to I believe the question. I didn't quite understand the second part of the question, but I know that it was partly about how America changed after 9/11. Also the collapse of the first internet bubble, again, when in the late 1990s, when Tecgnosis came out, many people, especially in the Bay Area, felt that we were about to maybe enter into a new economic utopia of tremendous abundance and global information. There was a positive feeling that was partly hype and partly legitimate hope. So when 9/11 happens and you have the collapse of the bubble, suddenly things are a little more dystopian, or at least not as utopian. And one of the things that I am happy about my book is that it deals with the positive and inspiring mythologies, the utopias, but also the dystopias, the fears, and the paranoia, all of which became more evident as we go through the 21st century. So with the initial wave of virtual reality in the 1990s, there was a sense of we're building a new space where new expressions, new artistic forms, new kinds of experiences are all going to be available. But in the middle of the next decade, it's more like the film The Matrix, where yes, we can build a illusionary digital world, but it might be a prison too. So one helpful way to think about this now is that we're all aware now of the power of conspiracy theory in our world today, whether in the United States, in Argentina, in Egypt, all over. And there's a way in which the media conditions of the internet support conspiracy thinking. And the twist that I give it, or that Tecgnosis allows us to see, is the way in which that conspiracy thinking is connected to religious thought and magical thinking. And so it's not just arguments about what's true. It's also about how we build our world models and what are the deeper patterns that are informing those models. In a way, we're in a paradox where the development of new technologies of communication over the last 150 years, the work of science, the work of rationality, of understanding the world of signals, of information, of communication, of networking. And yet, as we develop those tools more and more, we have created a situation where you can think of it as the irrational or the magical or the transrational is now actively invading so many domains of our existence. We all feel it on some level.
Tecgnosis trabaja muy bien esta cuestión de la conexión entre los miedos sociales y el fondo mágico mítico que arrastra el pensamiento global actual. En un nivel individual, ¿usted encuentra que también aparece esa relación mágico-mística con los aparatos? Pongo un ejemplo. Una máquina se me apaga. Digo, mi celular se murió, la computadora se murió y espero al técnico que lo va a reparar como si fuera un chamán que va a levantar todo lo que está ahí contenido. ¿Esto también se expresa gracias a la opacidad que esos objetos tienen ante nosotros?
Absolutely. This is a wonderful question, very important. One way of asking it again is another paradox. And I first read this paradox in the work of Philip K. Dick, the science fiction writer. And he talked about the way that as we develop more and more technologies, particularly of surveillance and of artificial intelligence, that we find ourselves, again, paradoxically, back in a pre-modern frame of mind that we could call animism. And so we have two impulses. One is that a kind of natural way of relating to this new environment is a kind of animism. My machine is alive. In some way, I think about it as being maybe some artificial intelligence. Maybe it's going to become conscious. Or when I walk through the street, some part of my body knows that I'm being watched, as if I am walking through the jungle and there are tigers about. And I have that sense of being watched in a new way, right? But at the same time, this question about opacity in a way, that whole animist imagination is a sign of our incapacity to really reckon with the technology as such, as a mere machine, as a mechanical process that can be understood. And so there's a part of us that the critical mind wants to disenchant the new technologies to understand how they fit into power and economics. But at the same time, individually, we also find ourselves enchanted whether we want to or not. And so we're pulled in this complicated way between enchantment and disenchantment around these increasingly intelligent machines. Here's an example. Let's say it's 5 years from now, we're all meeting again, and I bring along with me my new robot companion who is charged up with artificial intelligence. And we have a conversation. It seems pretty lifelike, pretty human, or at least has a personality, seems to be making decisions. Do I have an ethical, is there an ethical demand for me to treat this new creature with certain rights, that I respect it, the way that we think now about animals? You know, we used to treat animals just terribly, you know, they have no rights. And increasingly, even in our law, we are recognizing the rights of non-humans. Will we be called to extend that ethical circle to these machines? Because at the same time, I might feel that that's right, or even intellectually see the value of extending those rights. But it's also going to be a machine made by a corporation with a lot of power that I need to remain critically engaged with. And the very call to treat it as a living person undermines my capacity to recognize that I am still under the sway of a kind of corporate technological power regime that I might need to resist in order to stay free as a person, as a culture. How do I reconcile these? You mentioned shamans and shamanism. I believe that one of the reasons that psychedelics have gone mainstream, which as somebody who has been in that world my whole life since I was a teenager, is still shocking to me how much that's happening. I believe that that's happening partly because the psychedelic vision has a kind of shamanic imagination in it that is appropriate for a world, the world we live in, where we are engaging more and more non-human agents that have more and more lifelike qualities, that there's a connection between these. And one more thing on that, often inside of psychedelic culture, and I can't speak obviously for Argentina, very different situation, but from the United States perspective, there's a lot of romanticism about shamanism. But I believe that if properly seen, the shamanic worldview allows for not just connections with non-human spirits, but it also gives us a way of understanding trickery and the need to stay critical even in this post-rational world of non-human interactions.
Pensaba si en este camino, cambiando un poco la perspectiva, pero siguiendo la relación que mantenemos con el exterior, con lo que no conocemos o con la máquina, si no aparece una paradoja, porque por un lado tenemos esta relación que recién Margarita mencionaba en relación a las nuevas tecnologías de confianza, de fe en esas máquinas, y al mismo tiempo tratamos de acoplarnos a esas máquinas. Es decir, si usted no ve una especie de tendencia a acoplarnos a las máquinas y volvernos... Bueno, en el libro habla sobre los cyborgs, ¿no? Sobre la idea de convertirnos en nuevas subjetividades que acoplen lo humano, lo biológico, lo maquínico, los saberes ancestrales.
Yes, again, I'll try my best, but to understand that, yes, we, on the one hand, we recognize we need to keep some critical distance from these machines if we're not simply going to become reactive or only nodes in a network without any agency. And yet, as just in the circumstances of our lives now, we are increasingly coupled with machines. And that coupling is going to grow more and more intense relatively quickly. We're not done with just carrying around my phone and being cyborged that way. How do we respond to this? It is a paradox. I don't know. I feel like there is going to be more resistance to some of this, but I don't know what form it's going to take, how strong it will become, whether it will become very conflictual. I also believe that there are, at least, and again, I'm speaking here from San Francisco, near Silicon Valley. I know that culture reasonably well. It's not my world, but I know a lot about it. And there really are many people who have a lot of power in the technology sector that envision a total fusion and the emergence of a post-human kind of consciousness. Let me, stick the wires into my head and become one with the computer and expand. And that vision is going to become, I think, more visible and more disturbing and challenging for a lot of the rest of us. And we're starting to see it more clearly now, but I believe it will become even more clear in a way, the post-human party and the rest of us who are like, I'm not quite ready for that. So I think that will be something that becomes more visible in the coming years.
Si esa fusión, ¿usted cree que tiene un carácter absolutamente racional, posthumano, o es la recuperación de saberes ancestrales, es la fusión con la naturaleza? ¿Qué carácter tiene esa fusión?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I don't know. I can only see that there are elements of both. I believe that the desire for an expanded post-human consciousness is partly motivated by a longing for a re-embedding in reality, in nature, that there is an alienation factor in modern consciousness, and that, not to be too romantic, but there is a longing for some connection on a deeper level. But my fear is that longing, which inspires some of the creative developments in technology today, is that it gets kind of captured and redirected into something that is, just more of a unknown. But it's difficult because to defend a human against the post-human is challenging for modern people, because we know there really isn't an essence to humans. We change. We're different in different places. We're different in different times. So if I'm defending the human against a post-human that is taking over, making something I don't want to go, it's difficult in a way. And part of populism today, not all of it, there's a lot of other reasons, but part of it is a sense that the global technoculture is pulling people farther and farther away from familiar forms of being human. And so part of populism is a reactionary resistance to the sense of what's coming. And there's some legitimate fear there. It's important to say that. But at the same time, we know that humans aren't one way. And maybe it's precisely for that reason that we are the ones that engender this next phase of the history of the planet that manifests as artificial intelligent networks. It just might not be very fun for us. It's a very good question, though.
Bueno, yo voy a tomar un poco por donde estás viniendo. Me interesa pensar en la idea de la contracultura que comenzaste hablando, como ese espacio que se creía en los 90 tanto en Internet como un ámbito de nuevas oportunidades, de libertades, no sé, el tema del copyright libre, por ejemplo, y ciertos temas que eran tan típicos de los 90 que se vieron defraudados posteriormente, como vos lo tratás. Y recién nos hablabas de que muchos de los temas que vos tocás también en tu obra después terminaron siendo mainstream, ¿no? Entonces me preguntaba qué lugares ves hoy como resquicios contraculturales en el ámbito tecnológico donde se puedan desarrollar estrategias contraculturales, o si ya no existe algo que pueda dentro de ese sistema buscar alternativas.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. My sense is that the counterculture today, and again, I can only speak as an American, but from my perspective, even though I consider myself part of an older counterculture, and one that still has some lessons, I believe, for our moment, that the dominant mode of counterculture today is reactionary, is right-wing in America. Meaning they are the resistors. They are fighting the battle against the oppressive globalist state, et cetera, et cetera. And even the tricks and techniques of using chaos and absurdity and humor as a way of pushing back against what's seen as oppressive social norms is more a work of the right now than of the left as it was in the past. So it's very confusing for those reasons. But I do believe there are some things that are still useful to think about, and one is a sort of art of disappearance, a way of hiding in plain sight, of being in the world but not of the world. A certain quality there that I associate with counterculture may be the way to sustain human community and human values in a situation when things are very difficult to disentangle from the larger madness of the internet. I also feel that having a personal facility with altered states so that you recognize them, you know how to work with them, and you are not overly amazed by them, which is something that we can associate with aspects of the counterculture. In a way, spirituality is really just about other states of consciousness and the body, that a familiarity with those is actually very helpful at a point when technoculture is going to get better and better at producing simulations of altered states. So you go into a VR, you're having a psychedelic experience. Is that good? Is it bad? I don't know, but it's good to be familiar with exploring your own possibilities of altered states as a way to navigate a world that will have more altered states in it as a social fact.
Vamos a hacer una última pregunta de nuestro lado y luego vamos a abrir a las preguntas del público.
Anótense preguntas para hacer.
Mi última pregunta es la siguiente. Nuestro andamiaje mágico-mítico de premodernos no parece alcanzarnos para sentirnos cómodos con nuestras técnicas. Nuestro andamiaje lógico de modernos tampoco parece alcanzar para sentirnos cómodos con nuestras técnicas. ¿Hacia dónde deberíamos redefinir categorías y conceptos para encastrar mejor con el presente técnico que vivimos?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I can only speak very intuitively because conceptually I can't wrap my head around what is needed. I can't do it intellectually. But I believe that it has something to do with imagination. I don't know why. I think that whatever we're doing, whatever we mean by imagination, and I mean in the full sense of being able to conceive new possibilities, to have, tap into the sort of poetry of reality, the ability to tell stories and to create and understand mythology and symbolism, that domain has something for us that we haven't tapped yet. And this is not a rational answer because I can't find a rational answer. What is the scaffold? Does it take a conceptual form? Does it draw from certain kinds of knowledges so that we build some animist protocol, algorithmic model that can help us navigate? I really don't know. But I sense that there is something in the imagination of both the advanced networker and the shaman in the jungle and the little children in the playground that holds something for us at this point, and that it's important to take the imagination very seriously.
Bueno, amigos, vamos a tratar de... Vamos a abrir entonces las preguntas que tengan para hacerle a Erik. Es el momento de ustedes.
Hola y gracias. Quisiera preguntar si crees que es ingenuo la gente que está viendo ahora en el tema de Web3, que están hablando de un metaverso, donde dentro de este mundo todo va a ser igualitario, en términos de socioeconómicos, de género y cultural, cuando son corporaciones y empresas los que están creando estos metaversos, donde también son gente de diferentes países y diferentes culturas, que para mí suena como que va a ser algo homogéneo al final y no la diversidad que tenemos hoy en día. No sé si es una pregunta o eso estoy analizando mientras hablo contigo.
Yeah, I think your analysis is correct, that we are very legitimate to fear that any sort of metaverse construct will tend towards corporate domination, consumerism, and homogeneity. We can all see this homogeneity around the world if we travel, and that's just on the physical level. It's easier on that domain. So yes, I think we are right to question those possibilities. At the same time, we don't know if that ends up being the place where we meet the others. You know, right now, the internet is in many ways broken, and it is also not really the internet anymore. And yet, that's where we are right now. We're on the internet, and we have our phones, and we're you know, in a way, we're stuck. I mean, it's going to keep changing. So perhaps something like the metaverse is in our future, sort of whether we want to or not. And it doesn't mean we have to use it or not use it. But it does seem to be the case that technologies are always complicated enough and messy enough that the control of them is only so much. And so there are spaces of freedom within not so free environments. So that it's important to not totalize. Oh, it's only corporate domination, it's only tracking, because we don't know what openings may be in that space. But I think overall, yes, we are right to question and distrust that narrative, and to call for something else, something better. You know, virtual reality is a cool technology. You can do really amazing, wonderful things with it. But virtual reality run by a corporation that wants to survey even more data on me for its own purposes, that's not so cool. So it's important to distinguish, you know, virtual reality or the metaverse as a potential place and the way in which it's being controlled and manipulated by our current environment.
Hola, vos nos hablás desde la cercanía de Silicon Valley y yo te hablo desde el Triángulo del Litio. Acá hay límites, y puedo hacer referencia a esa publicación del 72 de los límites del crecimiento, Limits to Growth. Hablamos de las maravillas o de las pesadillas del desarrollo tecnológico como si fuera algo ilimitado. ¿Ves que se pueda truncar ese futuro pronto? Gracias a que para la producción del litio, por ejemplo, se necesita muchísima agua que ya no va a estar disponible dentro de nada.
Oh yes, we are definitely facing all manner of limits. And indeed, even within artificial intelligence discussions, that if we imagine the development of artificial intelligence as it's going now in certain directions, there are limits imposed even on their capacity because of the physical limitation of materials and runtimes and computer space. So in a way, I mean, you could, this is an example of how there's a kind of an almost apocalyptic drive within the technology framework to sort of get as far as it can out in front of limits. But from the outside, we can see all of those limits coming up and already here. So yes, I think that part of what the future we look at is not a total breakthrough, but a mixture of a kind of broken mixture of incredible developments, but within limitations that are increasingly constrained by all of the climate issues, pollution issues, limitations on resource, et cetera, et cetera. And that part of the challenge we're in is because inside technology, it has a fantasy of infinite development, but that those do hit real limits, but we don't know exactly where they are because technology can improve and break through a limit. And we've seen that already for the last 500 years. So it's a very strange situation where we can see those limits. They are already impacting things. And yet within the mind frame of that technological development, it sees itself as kind of perpetual.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Erik Davis. Gracias a Caja Negra también.